How's it going, everyone? I just got through VHS 1999. It's streaming on Shutter now. I'm just going to share my thoughts on that really quickly. Right off the bat, I will say I didn't like this quite as much as VHS 1994. To me, VHS 1994 had more energy and creativity to it. It was made with more confidence. It was more consistently good, and it had a better overall anthology concept to it, in my opinion. Now, that said, I still liked three out of the five entries in this one a lot, but we're going to go through one by one and we'll talk about that. So, first off, we have Shredding, written and directed by Maggie Levin. And like this was sort of one of the more forgettable ones for me. It didn't help that, this one didn't quite win me over right off the bat. You had the introduction first where, the kid is playing with his toy soldiers. It's sort of funny, but it's a little bit weird. And, at least for an introduction, I felt like it kind of went on a little bit. And then once you actually get into shredding, you're getting like another good, like almost 10 minutes, almost, I would say, of, the kids in this punk rock band just kind of like, farting around basically. And I was scratching my head thinking, like, hey, we're almost 10 minutes in here, and where is this going? And like I don't know, they're stuffing jello and blow up dolls and jumping on it because I don't know. Eventually, punk zombies do show up in this haunted space that they've been lured into, but they're too obscured, they're too sort of like overshadowed and in the dark most of the time to really ever have any impact. And I just, didn't really sort of like walk away from this one with a whole heck of a lot. It was just felt slapped together very fast, and I didn't give it another thought once it was done. It's a slow start and builds to kind of an underwhelming climax. The punk zombies look cool, but for the amount of time that we've sort of like spent waiting for something to happen, that was kind of a I don't know, a middling payoff to me. Okay, and next up we have Suicide Bid, directed by Johannes Roberts or Johan Roberts, whichever it is. Please correct me in the comments if you know which one it is for sure. I really love this sequence a lot. It's about a girl in a sorority who, for that sorority, has to spend an entire night, locked in a coffin in a gravesite, which happens to also be haunted by the undead corpse of a woman who was buried alive there under similar circumstances. And it really makes good use of the claustrophobia of the situation. It's a very simple premise with some sort of scares that you could argue are tropes or things you would expect, but because you buy into the woman's claustrophobia so well, you're with her for it. Like this, it was very engrossing. And when the undead corpse finally burst through her coffin, that was a great spot, I thought, to end the entire sequence. Like if they had ended on the shot where the corpse, I forget her name, it started with a G, it was Guillotine or Guillotine or something. Again, please, if you remember off the top of your head, just correct me down in the comments. But as soon as she burst in, and it sort of like, did the freeze frame cut to static on the VHS tape thing, that would have been a perfect shot to end it on. But it does go on a little bit from there, and it shows her taking her revenge on her sorority sisters for burying her alive, essentially. And I mean, I can understand why maybe you would feel the need to give your audience closure, but for me personally, I didn't need to have that all spelled out for me. It didn't like sink the segment either, but I just, again, I don't know why, but I thought that that was such a great opportunity to end it with a bang, and they let it amble on a little bit more than it needed to. Overall, still really liked the sequence. Probably my favorite of the bunch. It's maybe tied with the last one, but we'll get to that. But overall, it was a big step up, and it restored my confidence after the first one. And then next up, we have Aussies Dungeon, written and directed by Flying Lotus, musician turned filmmaker Flying Lotus, written alongside himself and Zoe Cooper. Now, Flying Lotus, if you know anything about him as a filmmaker, if not as a musician, he made that film Kuso that is also on Shutter, and another one called Perfect that I haven't watched yet. But if you have seen Kuso, you kind of get an idea of like what this guy's slant is. He really likes that sort of gonzo, gross out, very sort of like eccentric, off kilter approach to filmmaking. The kind of thing that you would expect from, I don't know, guys like Brian Usna and Stuart Gordon back in the 90s, but with more of like a trauma level of, not caring about offending anyone thrown into the mix. So, with all that in mind, we get a segment from him called Aussies Dungeon. Now, really like the way this one started out. It has a great 90s game show parody production. Like, if you ever remember any of those 90s game shows where kids had to like wrestle and race overall tops, overall tops, overall types of sort of like Nerf mountains and weird pools full of like neon goo, that Nickelodeon era. It absolutely nails that. It's got the perfect, obnoxious colors and noises, just the whole aesthetic that you associate with that. That's all bang on. And you've got Stephen Ogg, I believe is the character actor's name, as the host of the show. He was also in Walking Dead, Snowpiercer, Better Call Saul. Initially, I thought the twist was a little bit lame. Like, when you find out that, well, after, the one girl who's a contestant has, very cruelly, broken and torn open her leg. And then fast forward to the point where the parents of that girl have kidnapped the host, in anger for their kid losing. That's when I was, sort of not so into it anymore, just because it's felt like it's sort of lapsed into sort of like a bit of a spell of torture porn. Like, I mean, you can tell that Flying Lotus really loves the movie Audition based on this segment. It's quite clear. A little of that kind of thing goes a long way, and especially when it started out feeling like it was a pretty sort of smart, savage, and sort of mildly raunchy sort of satire on 90s television. When that started happening, part of me kind of deflated a little bit, just because like you had all this sly wit that just kind of seemed like it gave way to just sort of generic sort of gross out sadism. But then it goes a little bit further than that when the host, played by Stephen Ogg, leads the parents to a lair where where the girl supposedly can finally get her wish, the wish she was competing for. And it's at that point that you find out, based on what her wish was, that she resents her parents for pushing her to win as much as she resents the host for playing his part in her loss, and also like mocking her injury, which he does rather cruelly. Although, let's be honest, that was actually pretty funny in the moment. The ending of it, however, still felt just a little bit slapped together. I was glad that there was a little more to it than just ending on sort of like a discount audition note, but it still didn't find quite the right way to end for me. So while I did enjoy this segment quite a bit, still not quite as good as the first one, but good enough. And then the fourth segment is called The Gawkers. It's directed by Tyler McIntyre and written, by Tyler McIntyre and Chris Lee Hill. Now, this was another one of the throwaway sequences for me. There's really not a whole lot to it at all. There's a new next door neighbor that moves in, a young lady that the boy next door and his friends all have the hots for. They find a way to, install a surveillance camera in her bedroom, not knowing that she's Medusa. And that's kind of all there is to it. It's really not a big deal. Like, you get a little bit of a peep show while the guys are installing the camera, which, I mean, I don't want to sort of go sounding preachy. I'm not a prude, but if the idea is that they're sort of telling us that these kids are kind of sleazy, then I don't know if we should, be able to see, this girl naked, even if they can, but we do. And given that it already has this sort of this found footage conceit, it does sort of feel a little bit like you're watching a peep show until someone changes the channel and then you're watching Medusa. And yeah, honestly, like that's all there is to it. They turn to stone afterwards. They're all dead. The end. It was, again, not like the worst thing I've seen in my life, but it didn't really sort of contain anything that, blew my hair back. But you know what? I will actually sort of take that back almost and mention that there was one little sequence that I thought was funny when the guys are all spying on the girl while she's washing her car in the driveway and a delivery van pulls up. Driver tries to show off a little bit of a dance of some kind to try and impress the girl. The way the delivery man dances was pretty funny. That did get a laugh out of me. So, I will give credit where it's due. But overall, on the whole, this one just kind of like, vaporized on the screen for me. I'm not going to be able to remember a thing about it a year from now. Ending on a high note, we have the sequence called To Hell and Back, and this one was written and directed by Vanessa and Joseph Winter. They just kind of made a splash of their own on Shudder as well recently with the movie Deadstream. If you haven't seen Deadstream yet, I highly recommend it. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, just go watch it. It is basically, in a nutshell, I sort of describe it as if Sam Raimi made an Evil Dead movie that was done in a found footage style, or if there was sort of an anthology found footage entry in the Evil Dead series, it might look a lot like Deadstream. Has a very deep and sincere love for Sam Raimi's style and his energy. And, for once, that fan worship has resulted in them actually internalizing what made that work. You're with these two guys who are transported into hell by a coven and essentially have to fight their way out. This one makes a really good use of a very minimal design. I mean, despite the fact that you can tell that, they were working with some pretty bare bones resources, that sort of like minimal style does, I think, create an effective depiction of hell. Like, I mean, I don't think hell by definition could be something that was, too sensational, because sensation implies, sort of some sort of like semblance of positive life affirmation of some kind, at least to me. So I think that was, a good way to sort of fuse, the resources that they had with the concept. And there's some very imaginative character design. There's a couple of them that, genuinely caught me out of absolutely nowhere. And I mean, this guy, Joseph Winter, who plays the character Troy in this, I think he's got a bright future ahead of him. He's a very natural comic actor. I mean, besides being a very sort of sound director, I could listen to this guy have panic attacks and pant and wheeze and scream and curse and yell and just lose his shit at, supernatural entities, on a 24-hour feed. Like, he's just got such a contagious energy to him. He's a prize. Like, he's one to watch. And I'm honestly like just really curious to see what this couple as a filmmaking team, might eventually do even outside of the found footage genre. I mean, for now, they've, got a really good sort of bead on this niche, and I'm willing to let them have it because they've carved it out for themselves very nicely. And I don't even think I'll go into too many details about like the actual story of that one. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory from what I've said anyways, but it's one of those ones that is just best, to be experienced on its own. In fact, I mean, honestly, if this last segment was a proof of concept, or if for that matter, it is actually sort of like maybe sort of the Cliff Notes version of an idea that Vanessa and Joseph Winter are sketching out for another feature. I mean, if you're looking for any reassurances, like, I mean, if my vote counts for anything, go for it. I would love to see this segment spun out into a feature-length film. And so with that in mind, I would say it is probably my favorite of the bunch. I mean, the other one, I'm sorry, just one second. Yes, Suicide Bid. Again, Suicide Bid was still very good. It's, the perfect example of how a segment in one of these anthologies could be done. But the last one, this one, To Hell and Back, just, swept me up the same way that Deadstream did. It's just, full-fledged unapologetic fun. It's the one that just made me sort of like, feel the love and exhilaration of filmmaking the most. Like you can tell that, this couple is intoxicated by the very act and opportunity of making a movie. And that just, adds like, just the sprinkle of elevation on top to make this one my favorite of the bunch, I think. So, I think overall, I would say I did once again still really enjoy this installment, even if it does again feel like a bit of a step down from VHS 1994. It still has enough solid material to make me happy, and it keeps the raw spirit that gives this series its charm very intact. It's the kind of viewing experience that makes you want to pick up a camera with some of your friends and just see what happens. And, again, for keeping that sort of like fighting, raw, guerrilla filmmaking spirit alive, I give it mad props. And I will still be there when the next one drops. Anyways, that's all I've got for now. I am still working on my marathon series of the Brooklyn 99 Halloween heist specials. Probably going to be dropping that on Halloween Day, but that's probably my next stop. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and I will see you all soon. Take care.